So what are some of the biggest downsides of living in Colombia? Hi all, I'm Ezrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. Last week I did a video listing 5 reasons why you should live in Colombia, and today I'm going to tackle the flip side of that and give you 5 reasons why you shouldn't. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide how much weight my pros and cons hold for you, but personally, if you're unsure, then stay tuned for next week's video where I'll be just straight up giving you my opinion on whether you should or shouldn't live there. For today though, let's dive into some of the arguments for why not to make the move. So for my first pick, let's just get the argument you probably heard the most out of the way, and that is that Colombia can be very dangerous. You may have heard recently about the murders of 8 US citizens in Medellin throughout the last couple of months of 2023, and although this is a higher homicide rate than usual against foreigners in the country, it is still something to be aware of. The fact is, Colombia is undoubtedly a crime-ridden country, in some areas more than others. I still strongly believe that you can live safely there, but only if you take some precautions that you mightn't be used to bothering with in your home country. Specifically, I'd say it's best to get a taxi or Uber instead of walking around at night, and if you are walking at night, try and either stick to the higher class neighbourhoods with lower crime rates, or areas where there are a lot of people, so that it's harder for anyone to pull anything overt on you. During the night or day, I'd also say not to have your phone out for everyone to see in public for extended periods of time, and just in general, don't go in neighbourhoods that are of the first or second estrato. For those unaware, estratos are basically a metric used in Colombia to measure the affluence of any given area, with 1 being the poorest and 6 being the wealthiest. As much as I hate to admit it, the poorer neighbourhoods are the ones that seem to have the highest crime rates, which is why I say it's best to avoid the first 2 estratos unless it happens to be a designated tourist site that's heavily monitored by police or security. But yeah, I'd recommend searching for an estrato map for the city you're in on Google, as these will give you a good idea of which areas of the city are less safe. Finally, in light of the recent murders, I should give a warning about using dating apps in Colombia. Several of those murders were actually a result of meeting someone on an app, and so that's another thing you should be extra cautious about. Try and make sure that you've been talking with someone for a good while before meeting them in person, and when you do, it's best to go somewhere very public with a lot of people around. Again, first or second estrato neighbourhoods are a big no-no. Don't get me wrong, there are obviously lovely people who live in these neighbourhoods too, including several of my own friends, but in general, those kinds of neighbourhoods should be mostly avoided by foreigners. Anyway, those were a lot of precautions, which brings me back to my point that yes, you can't be so blasé about safety in Colombia as you may be at home. And even if you do follow these precautions, although they'll reduce the risks dramatically, they're not 100% foolproof. I tend to think that the odds are low enough to live comfortably if you follow these precautions, but for many, the fact that you have to worry about all of that to begin with may be a massive turnoff, which is why I'm listing this as an arguable reason not to live in the country. The second reason I wanted to bring up though is regarding the application process of moving itself. Simply put, it's mostly very difficult to get a permanent residency visa for Colombia. Now don't worry, if you don't mind going in and out for a few months at a time, you can do that with a simple tourist permit, which you don't even need to apply for. It's just a stamp they give you in the passport when you arrive. But if you want to settle into the country permanently, that's quite a bit trickier. The long and short of it is that unless you're a Colombian who's previously renounced their citizenship and wants to reapply, or you're a relative or legal beneficiary of someone who is a permanent resident, then there's really no way to gain permanent residency instantly. Instead, you'll have to obtain one of the migrant visas and hold it anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on the visa type and some other factors, before you can apply for full residency. Now that could be all well and good, but the issue is that obtaining a migrant visa can also be pretty difficult, as none of them are exactly the most accessible for the average schmuck like me. I won't go over them all here, or we'll be here forever, but in case you're interested, I'll describe just the ones that are relatively easier to obtain. Firstly, you have the pension visa for those who are retiring with a pension in Colombia, the work visa for those who are employed and sponsored by a Colombian company, the marriage visa, and then the investment visas for anyone who invests roughly around 120,000 US dollars or more in a Colombian property or company. So as you can see, even those quote-unquote easier migrant visas still aren't particularly straightforward to obtain. Even if one of them does seem doable to you though, there's also the question of whether you'd actually want it. Like with a work visa, for instance, you gotta remember the wages in Colombia are likely kind of abysmal compared to what you get from home, even when you factor in the lower cost of living. So do you really want to work for a Colombian company? Or maybe you're looking at the investors visas because you actually have around 120 grand to invest in a property or something. Well, that's great until you realize that this will only grant you a 3-year visa, and if you're using this visa to eventually get a permanent residency visa, then that's not going to work, because the permanent residency visa requires that you hold it for a minimum of 5 years in total, meaning you'll have to invest another 120 grand after that first investment in order to extend your visa beyond 3 years. So unless you're earning well into 6 figures, this probably isn't going to be that easy. Of the visas I just mentioned, that leaves the marriage visa and retirement visas, which are arguably the most straightforward, but obviously these are only going to apply for a select group of people. So all in all, my recommendation is just to get by on the tourist permit, which will grant you a total of 6 months in the country per year for 3 months at a time. If it's permanent or bust for you though, well then these visa requirements may make this another reason not to live in the country. Not saying that these requirements are unreasonable per se, obviously first world countries can be just as firm if not firmer, just that in terms of second world countries, Colombia is on the stricter side, so that's just something to be aware of. Anyway, for my next reason not to live in Colombia, I wanted to iterate on something that I just mentioned, and that is the low income in the country. At the time of making this video, the minimum wage in Colombia is 1.3 million pesos, or $340 a month. Now, you might think that this is offset by the low cost of living in the country, and that's true to an extent. $340 a month is going to get you a lot more in Colombia than it is in the US, obviously, and if you're extremely frugal, it might even be enough to live off in a first or second estratal neighborhood, mind you, which I wouldn't recommend. It's also worth mentioning that Colombia is currently seeing an overall rise in cost of living, and if you're earning money in pesos, it's something you'll be even more acutely aware of. Obviously, the way to counteract all of these disadvantages is to have a remote job where you're earning money from your home country or somewhere that pays better, but this isn't a luxury everyone has. If you're not someone who's in this position, then earning money from a Colombian company or business is really your only option. Of course, you could work for a business that pays better, but if you want a good quality of life, you'll probably need an affluent job or to work for hours on end. Ultimately, I think it's a much better option if you're able to get remote work. I personally work remotely on a part-time basis a couple of days a week, and even what I earn from that is enough for me to live comfortably in Colombia, simply because of the relative strength of the Australian dollar. If you're earning US dollars though, those are around 1.5 times stronger, so you'll be getting even greater value from it when in Colombia. As said though, I realize this isn't something that everyone can do super easily, and so if you are thinking of quitting your job and working for a business in Colombia, just be aware of those downsides. I can only speak for myself and say that for me, if I didn't have a remote job and I had to get work in Colombia, that would be enough of a reason to stop me from living there. I'll let you be the judge of whether that's important to you though. Next up, I wanted to talk about a thing that I'd say bothers me more than anything else on this list, and that is the lack of ease and efficiency. This can be observed in practically every facet of life in Colombia, whether you're looking for a business's location on the internet, or you're trying to figure out the bus schedule, or you're waiting for a flight. It becomes the norm to just expect that the information you've read is out of date or the thing you're waiting for is delayed. You'll notice this the most when it comes to anything involving paperwork or really any kind of procedure. Things like renting an apartment, trying to extend a tourist permit, opening a bank account, paying a bill, or sometimes even just getting a Colombian SIM card that works for more than a month. See my other video on that. All of these things can be a real headache. As I said before, this is something that especially gets on my nerves. One of my biggest pet peeves in life is when there's something that should be dead easy, but for absolutely no good reason at all, it's made impossibly difficult. This is annoyingly an all too common occurrence in Colombia, and when it comes to anything involving paperwork at least, it often comes down to an overkill of bureaucracy. See, there are often more layers of security whenever you want to do anything of importance in Colombia. If you want to rent an apartment, for instance, it's not enough to just have a bond and sign a few forms. You'll also usually need either a co-signer who owns property in the country, or a CDT, which is something I won't go into here because that's a whole other bureaucratic barrel of monkeys. As for getting a SIM card, if you want it to work for more than 30 days, you'll often have to show the service provider proof of your phone's purchase, and then they have to register your phone's IMEI number into a government database. It's basically an initiative to prevent phone theft, as it allows them to deactivate phones that are reported as stolen. So as you can see, there's a recurring pattern here of being super security conscious, I guess because people are paranoid about getting duped, being a country with a reputation for crime and all. I would say though that it's more than just security measures that make things inefficient and difficult though. Often it just comes down to the fact that there's some really bad infrastructure in place when it comes to organizing anything. Like the examples I mentioned before, for instance, looking for a bus schedule or a business's location online. These things can be painstaking, because often the official info is either wrong, out of date, or simply non-existent. On top of all that, another thing you'll likely have to contend with is tardiness. Put simply, punctuality is not a widely held cultural value in Colombia, so this is yet another issue that can hold things up and make everything less efficient, like with the example I gave before of waiting for a flight. With all that in mind, my advice is to try and be as self-sufficient as you possibly can be in every aspect of life when in Colombia. The more you rely on others, the higher the chance is that you'll be let down, which I know sounds very pessimistic, but as said, there's often such little value for efficiency that you'll be dodging a bullet if you can get stuff done on your own. Finally, my last reason for not living in Colombia is another one you might have heard a bit before, and that is the language barrier. You probably already know that Spanish is the national language of the country, but you should also know that for the vast majority of people, this is the only language they speak. I mean, sure, a lot of people might know a few words here and there in English, but rarely enough for you to have any kind of conversation or even a simple exchange with them. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not complaining about this. Obviously, a lot of countries with English as a first language can't speak any other language either, but it is something to be mindful of. Now, I've heard from some people living in Colombia say that they've been able to get by without knowing almost any Spanish, and I'm sure it's doable. You just have to get used to using the phrase "no hablo español" at every waking moment and becoming a power user of Google Translate. If you are planning on picking some Spanish up though, I will make one strong recommendation. Start learning before you go. I tell you what, I've had it up to here with the amount of people who say that you'll become fluent in a language just by living in a country that speaks it. I can attest from first-hand experience living in Colombia for almost a year that no, that's not how it works. Yes, you might pick up some words, and yes, you might become more confident in speaking and understanding the language in real time, but the amount that you actually learn from just living there is way overstated. I've even had people try and challenge my own experiences on this, asserting that most of what I've learned must have come from living in the country, even after I've assured them otherwise, which just goes to show how pervasive and ingrained this lie has become. I mean, maybe if you live there for years on end, you might become more conversational, but I can guarantee you that it'll be way more efficient for you to learn the language actively rather than passively. By that I mean you'll learn a lot quicker if you get an app like Duolingo or have some regular Spanish classes. The key I've found is to be consistent with it. If you're really serious about learning, half an hour a day of Duolingo, for instance, would be a good plan. Personally, I can attest that like 99% of my Spanish vocabulary and grammar comes from what I've learned on Duolingo, not from what I picked up from living in Colombia for almost a year. I realise though that for many, dedicating so much time to learning a new language is quite a commitment, and so if you're someone who wants to have in-depth conversations with people in the country, this could be a potential barrier of entry. You might also wonder whether it's exhausting having to speak Spanish all the time. Interestingly, from my experience, I never consciously missed speaking in English, like I wasn't homesick for my language or anything like that. That said, whenever I did have the opportunity to speak it with someone who knew it fluently, there was this sense of ease that came over me, because, you know, it's nice to have 20,000 words of your vocabulary back and all. All in all though, I don't think a lack of Spanish should stop you from moving to Colombia, but you'll definitely need to be open to learning if you're serious about living there long term. With that though, we've reached the end of my list here, so I'm going to wrap this one up. I apologise if this came across as overly pessimistic. I just like to be completely honest about both the positives and the negatives, as I realise that most countries can really change people's lives for better or for worse, so I think it's good to be in the know before coming to a decision. As said though, if you want to hear me talk about the positives of living in Colombia, you can check out a video I did on that via the link in the description, and if you're still struggling to weigh things up after that, then stick around for next week's video where I'll be giving you my personal opinion on whether or not you should make the move. Until then though, thanks for watching all this way. As always, you're welcome to leave a question or a video suggestion in the comments below, and if you like this, feel free to like, subscribe, bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!